Hey guys, Jay Wilson here, your neighborhood-friendly technical success manager. It is day 2 of the working from home policy, and as I promised, every day I'm going to try to submit a training video based off of something that I read off of Domo Dojo. If you're not using the Domo Dojo, you really need to start. It's got this really active, technically oriented community of people who are looking for questions to answer, and they do, so take advantage of the resource. I came across this post from Dr. Wright asking about how to get the latest date with specific criteria. I loved his question because what occurred to me was this is not a Domo problem. This is just a I need to know more about SQL question, and I thought I would throw my hat in the ring. The general gist of the use case is Dr. Wright works in training, and they want to build a report that answers which people have completed required training. In this case, required training is program A, B, and C, and on what date did they complete all of their training. I love what Dr. Wright did. They submitted their code. It was great. They got some responses, and like I said, I just wanted to try my hand at answering said question. So here's the deal. If I could give you one tip when it comes to writing SQL, tip number 1 would be just start talking to your computers or get a rubber duck. You have to articulate what do you think the result should be, and potentially how does it differ from what you're actually getting. And the first thing you can do, there are 4 tips here, but I'm not going to give them all away at once. The thing you can do to help yourself in this case is articulate the granularity. What does one row of data in your results set represent? What do you want it to represent? Pro tip number 2, you have to know how SQL evaluates your query. What order will it answer or resolve your query in? I'm going to give you time to think about it. The answer is SQL will start with the from clause. What table am I pulling the data from? It will then apply the where clause filter and say, okay, what set of data am I interested in? If applicable, it will then apply the group by clause to establish the granularity of the data in the result set. If applicable, it will then apply the having clause to say, okay, just like the where clause, what set of data do I want to keep from my aggregate? It will then apply the order by clause, and lastly, the select. I'm actually a little bit shaky on the select and the order by clause, but I think at that point it's not really important. Okay. I'm gonna go through this presentation kind of explaining where Dr. Wright got started, where they got kind of confused, and then lastly, I'll talk about how I would implement it if this was an engagement that I was paid to take care of. So again, my sample data looks something like this. I have one row for each user, each program, and the completion date that they did on that program. That's a lie. It is theoretically possible that I have to do this training every year. So maybe I could have 2 or 3 entries for program A with different completion dates. That's fine. At the end of the day, in addition to the required A, B, and C, I've got some optional trainings D and E, whose is required is 0. And that makes sense to me because you know how it is at organizations. You have a required training, and then you have the fun stuff. I want to learn JavaScript. I want to learn Python. But that's not required training, whereas like InfoSec training probably is required. Cool. Let's get stuck in. So, question number 1, right off the bat. How many rows of data will this query return? It is syntactically correct. And this is not a trick question. Program A, Program B, and Program C are spelled correctly. How many rows of data will I return? 0 rows. It's right. It is correct. There will be 0 rows. Why are there 0 rows? Because for one record, I cannot be Program A and B and C at the same time. For one record, I can be Program A, or I can be Program B, or I can be Program C. So step just right out the gate. Or instead of and. Now, does this look right to you? When I first looked at it, I kind of stumbled a little bit. I was like, I think I'm missing some rows because I know, because I made the sample data set. User 2 has completed all of their training, and I expect to see 4 rows for user 2 and user 4 or something. And what I don't like about this SQL here is it's not clear to me what you expected the results to be, because your group by clause conflicts with your select clause. In SQL, in Microsoft T-SQL, you would have gotten an error message that says something along the lines of, with aggregate functions, and max is an example of an aggregate function, every field in the select clause must be wrapped in an aggregate function or included in the group by clause. That's loosely the error message you would have gotten from T-SQL if I tried to copy paste this query, because the program is not in an aggregate function and it is not in the group by clause. If I put this down here, then I can comfortably say, hey, I expect the granularity to be one row per program, and the last time they completed this training. What I don't like is MySQL lets this fly, and now that I've went over this, it makes sense. Okay, the group by clause is 1 row per user, but which program is it taking? The first one, the last one, the fourth one? I don't know, because I haven't been explicit here by wrapping this in a min or a max, a first or a last. So I don't like this syntax. But there you go. We can move on. So one of the pieces of feedback that the Dr. Wright got back was, hey, use the in clause to simplify all of these and statements, or really they should have been or statements. Fine. The in clause, beautiful. As a way of simplifying your SQL. I'm actually going to show you a better solution than this way at the end. And by better, I don't mean it's better because I came up with it. I mean better because I'm going to recommend a solution that doesn't require you to maintain code. We'll see. All right, this is the final answer, but I think I want to go blow up all of my code and build it from scratch. So we're here. The granularity is by program and user, and 1 row for the most recent completion date. Now, I'm going to teach you a technique called subquerying. I can take this entire perfectly valid query and wrap it inside of another function, inside of another select statement, and I can alias or rename the results of this as a table. Let's call it result. I could call it A, whatever. But this is also perfectly valid SQL. Now, why would I want to do something like this? Well, having agreed on the set of data that I'm interested in, I can now filter or continue iterating over this query. So I could, for example, say where user equals 1. And then I would get, the result of applying the where clause to this set of data. But I could actually go a little bit further, and I could say, hey, you know what? I want to group this data by user. And I'm going to keep with that select star, which is syntax that I said I don't like. So now we're actually back where Dr. Wright was originally, but now I'm using a subquery. Cool. Now, because I'm using a group by clause, I'm going to put user on the axis, and I'm going to count the rows. So now what I've got here is I say, okay, user 1 has completed 2 required trainings. User 2 and 4 have completed 3 required trainings. Now, what set of data am I interested in? I'm interested in keeping the rows where the count star is equal to 3. Let me write that down. I am interested in keeping the rows where count star is equal to 3. And now we have to make a decision. Is this for the where clause, or is this for the having clause? What happens if I do where count star equals 3? It breaks. Why does it break? I gave you the answer at the beginning. When can I filter on aggregate functions? Well, logically, I have to filter on aggregate functions after I've grouped by user, right? Because I want to know where, for each user, the count of rows is greater than 3. And because I want to do it after the aggregation, well, put the filter after the aggregation and use the having clause. This is the right answer. Cool. So now I can say, when did I complete my training? I can say max most recent complete. What is that called? Most recent completion date. And I'll call it as training completed date. Yeah. That is the right answer. Mr. Wright, or Dr. Wright, there you go. Now I said if I were implementing this for a customer, I would do it in a slightly different way, and I wanted to talk through that before we end this video. This is good. This gets the job done, but there's two things I strongly don't like about this. Thing number one is I don't like hard coding programs into MySQL, knowing full well next week the required list of training programs is going to change. And I want to make it easy for the end user to maintain their report without having to tell them, yeah, and now you got to go edit SQL, because nobody wants to edit SQL if they can avoid it. So that's problem that I have, number one. Problem number two that I have is this whole aggregation process in general. If I print out this report and hand it to you and I say, hey, these are the users that have completed their training, that's great. Let's go give them a bonus. But what I really care about is the users who haven't completed their training. And even if I take out this filter and hand this to you, okay, cool. I know users 2 and 4 did great and users 1 and 3 have work to do, but which trainings haven't they completed yet? So again, I'm not super keen on some of the requirements here. But again, I built this to help out Dr. Wright. Let's address the first issue. What I would do is I would say, if you create a web form that has just a distinct list of programs and if it's required or not, we could use that to filter our report. So let me spoof that for us. Let me create that. I'll create a Again, I would try to source this from a web form if I could, but in the absence of that, we'll do select distinct programs, and there is required flag from programs completed. So that'll give me 1 row per program and if it's required or not. Again, ideally from a web form. Now, to pull this into my big ol' query here, I need to change this section here. So instead of filtering on the where clause, I'm going to comment that out for a second. And I'm going to join, oh, the formatting's all jacked. I'm going to join to my new lookup table. I'm going to alias this as programs completed and lookup. And so when I do a join, I have to say, how are they related? What am I joining on? So pc.program is equal to lu.program. And now I can, instead of filtering where program is in a list, I could say where lu.isRequired is equal to 1. So when SQL evaluates this bit here, it'll say, okay, combine these two tables together and filter out, only keep the rows where is required equals 1. I should get the exact same results. Oh, except for I get an error message instead. The reason why I get an error message, it says, oh, the column called program is in both of these tables, PC and LU. Which one did you actually mean? And I'll say, I want to keep from the transaction table. And again, I I'm back to the same results that I had before. What I like about this modification, though, is now when you change your list of users, assuming the data is in a web form, you just update a web form instead of changing SQL. Which one's easier? You tell me. Now, again, I said I didn't like this. The thing that I would really, really rather do is drop the where clause altogether. And now it gives me all of the trainings that you've completed, but no way to differentiate between what was required and not required. So the last piece I can do here is I can alter my count function. So I'm going to add a new count function. Instead of counting everything, I'm going to build a case statement that says case when is required equals 1, then return a 1, else return a 0. And I'll call this the count of required trainings. And similarly, when is required is 0, then that'll be the not required training. And I don't like this being a count in this case because I'm doing ones and zeros. It's perfectly acceptable to do a sum, and then just to be consistent, the sum of 1 is the same as the count of star. Now when I run this is going to break. Yep. Is required is not in my list. In this subquery, I did not pass is required out to the greater query. So I need to include is required, required. Now remember, I said if you have an aggregate function, which we do, every column in this list needs to be in the aggregate function. So I also need to include lu.is required. Here I should use the explicit field name. Boom. Okay. So now my result is you've completed 2 of the required trainings, 2 not required trainings, la la la. And you have the training completed date. This is good-ish. This is good-ish. The last piece of the puzzle that I need is I just need to know, but are they actually done training? So I'm going to borrow my calculation for the required training. How many required trainings did they complete? They completed 3 or 2. How many required trainings were they supposed to complete? Well, what I want to do is I want to say when the sum or the count of required trainings is equal to the right number, then return a 1 or training complete. Else return training not complete. That's what I want to do. Now to get the answer to what is the right number, we're actually, this is I would say bad SQL, but I'm going to cheat. We're going to use another subquery, and I'll say, well, the right answer is the count of required rows in my lookup table. Select count star from lookup is required, where is required equals 1. This subquery will evaluate to 3, or whatever the right answer is, 4, 3, A, B, and C. And then it'll say, for that person, did they complete 3 trainings? If yes, then return training complete, else return training not complete. And let's see what that looks like. We're done. Woo, that was a lot. That was a lot. That was a lot. The secret to getting a grip on SQL, I think if you're kind of in that intermediate post-beginner phase, the most important thing that you can do for yourself is try to really understand, as I look at a query, in which order are my clauses evaluating? You have to have that on ice first. And so again, the order was from, where, group by, having, then select. The select is arguably the least important part, and then the order by clause. And then my beautiful rubber duck. Oops, my beautiful rubber duck. As you're getting started in SQL, to avoid frustration, the best thing you can do for yourself is talk to yourself. Talk through what you think your code is supposed to be doing, and talk through what it actually is doing by reading through the code line by line and saying, this means that. In terms of my SQL tips, this is just one of 4. I've got a couple more in my back pocket. But the best thing you can do right now is to articulate what is the granularity of the data set. What does one row of code, what should one row in your table represent, both in the final result and what you're currently getting. So, Dr. Wright, if you're seeing this video, I hope it was really helpful for you and illuminating in terms of just giving you a little bit more support on your SQL training. My name's Jay Wilson. You can reach out to me at jae.wilson@domo.com. I'm a technical success manager. I'm here for your success. So if you have any questions, one, do use a Domo Dojo, but also feel free to email me. Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye.